broadcast bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Japanese controls the Pacific. The U.S. gains small victories, but the losses outweigh the wins. Mortars, shells, bombs, bullets, and bodies litter the many islands in the Pacific, signs of the Japanese invasions taking place there. Pearl Harbor bombed, a declaration of war signed. The Axis powers are making moves and taking control of the Pacific and Europe, splitting the U.S. into two different groups of war. At this point, almost all the troops that the U.S. sent into battle in the Pacific and Europe were white men in their 20s with only a few weeks to 2 months of training. Social injustice was still a major problem in America, a problem that wouldn't be solved for many years.
The Navajo people are one of many Native American tribes. Native Americans have a long history filled with many tragedies, like the Sandy Creek Massacre and the Trail of Tears. The U.S. had treated the Native Americans with disrespect, causing many of the tragic moments in their past. The U.S. also has done things like granting the Indian Citizenship Act. In the late 1920s and 1930s, many young Navajo children were sent to schools taught by English-only speaking people, with only a few translators. Most teachers were very harsh to the children, saying things like, "A white boy could do this better," or "Navajo language and culture is useless, only English can help you in this world." This would be done to try and flush the Navajo out of them. Students would be punished if they were caught speaking Navajo, often by putting a bar of soap in their mouth. The very best students would continue to high school, where they would learn a common curriculum more than just learning English. This "you'll never be good enough" system all changed a year or two after the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
The U.S. Marines realized that they needed a quicker, more efficient code. Originally, the code that they were using was both inefficient and could be deciphered by the Japanese cryptographers, resulting in catastrophic consequences for the American side during a mission. In World War I, the Choctaw Native Americans were used as a telephone squad and would speak in a code. These were considered the original code talkers. A man named Philip Johnston came up with the idea of the Navajo code talkers. His idea was that the code would be mostly unwritten and not only involve direct translations from the Navajo language, but also have a special step in decoding messages as well. The U.S. Marines started recruiting in Oklahoma in 1940, and training for the Navajo code talkers ended in 1942. The Navajo Marines were sent off to training camps with other Marines. This included running, swimming, lifting, shooting, team-based training, and many more exercises. After their basic training, though, the Navajo Marines went to separate camps. Up until they got there, they had no idea why the Marines wanted Navajos. This is where the code talkers created the code, along with where the next group of Navajo Marines came to learn it.
Artillery. Code word.
It was plain and simple with the Navajo code talkers themselves. They had one mission, that was one mission only.
In code, Private Whitehorse.
To send and receive messages secretly.
Chester Nez explains that he and lots of other Navajo code talkers were told by the Marines that the code that they had created was highly classified and could only be spoken of once it had been declassified on August 16th. Type 1 of the code was a 26-word code. While using this code, the code talkers had to spell out every word. For example, wo-la-chi, which is ant in Navajo, was used to symbolize the letter A. Type 1 was used in battle a little bit. However, the code often took very long to send a message. The code talkers slowly developed Type 2, which had over 500 words and included words that symbolized words in English. For example, since no word in Navajo means submarine, they said beshlo, which means iron fish. A sample Type 2 message would directly translate to Ask for many big guns and tortoise fire at 123 bear tail drop Mexican ear mouse owl Victor elk 50 yards left flank ocean fish Mexican deer. The real meaning of this message, after being translated, is request artillery and tank fire at 123B. Company E move 50 yards left flank of Company D.
Mortar shells were being dropped down. They were hunkering desperately in their foxhole. Company commander wrote down a message asking for help, handed to a Navajo code talker. This is what the Navajo code talker said. This is the actual message that was sent on Iwo. The be ana achi bi that is tahi de na sonse taji chochin sita sa ta asta na ki shash. What does that mean? This is what he said in Navajo. Sheep, eyes, nose, deer, destroyer, tea, mouse, turkey, onion, sick horse, 3, 6, 2, bear. As each Navajo word came through the air, the code talker down at the beach command post, he writes it down in English. What did he write down? Send demolition team to hill 362B. There were 3 hills on the north side, 362A, 362B, and 362C. Beneath 362B was the problem. This message took 20 seconds. After 20 seconds, Beach Command Post organized a rescue team to save that company of Marines. If that message was sent in English code, it would have taken 30 minutes. 20 seconds in Navajo, 30 minutes in English code. Those guys pinned down on north side didn't have 30 minutes.
The code talkers were fast and made no mistakes. The Navajos served with almost every Marine operation to give the U.S. an advantage. Some of the major places the code talkers fought at were in Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Tarawa, Guam, Honolulu, and Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was possibly the most important of these battles. The Navajo code talkers were a major part of the battle, and some say they are the reason the island was able to be captured. The invasion of Iwo Jima was essential for the rest of the war because the U.S. needed a place for an airfield to have fighter jets and bombers to take off and land at. Without the Navajo on the side of the U.S., they wouldn't have as many victories, resulting in a potential change to the outcome of World War II.
Iwo Jima was the key to defeating Japanese control in eastern continental Asia, as it was at the heart of the area under Japanese rule. The final amphibious landing of the Pacific War was launched from Iwo Jima to Okinawa, an island just south of Japan, and a bombing run starting from Iwo Jima helped to keep control of Okinawa. The U.S. slowly took control of the area near and in Japan, finally dropping 2 atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Axis powers in Europe surrendered on May 7, 1945, and the Japanese finally surrendered on September 2, 1945, and peace was restored in the Pacific and Europe. Without the Navajo code talkers and the Marines invading Iwo Jima, Japanese control would have continued for much longer.
The efficiency of the Navajo code talkers was not something to be forgotten. They are one of the reasons the Marines were so successful throughout World War II. Major Howard Connor stated, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima."